At a roaring birthday party filled with tattooed bikers, laughter, and engines rumbling outside, a sudden silence fell. Rex, the loyal German shepherd of a veteran named Jack, locked his gaze on the birthday cake. His growl turned into furious barking, pawing and circling the table as if warning of something no one else could see. Why would a dog panic at a cake meant for the daughter of the Iron Serpent's leader? And more importantly, what kind of organization would dare to target a child at such a gathering? This is where our story begins. Stay with us as we uncover a chain of events that will test loyalty, courage, and the meaning of brotherhood. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and how this moment makes you feel. And wherever you are today, we wish you a good day filled with peace and hope. It was late afternoon in a small western town in Colorado, the kind of place where the horizon stretched endlessly and the dry wind carried both the scent of pine and dust. The Iron Serpents Motorcycle Club had taken over the wide wooden garage at the edge of town, decorating it with string lights, leather banners, and long tables groaning with food and drink. The occasion was rare and joyous, the birthday of Emily Walker, the only daughter of Cole Walker, the feared yet respected leader of the Iron Serpents. Among the guests who arrived, two figures stood out not because of their tattoos or roaring engines, but because of the quiet respect they commanded. Jack Carter, a 42-year-old veteran with broad shoulders, weathered hands, and eyes marked by both grief and resilience, and Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, dark-backed with tanned fur, amber eyes, and a bearing that spoke of discipline and loyalty. Jack and Rex were not strangers in this circle. Years earlier, Cole Walker had found himself cornered in a late-night ambush on a desert road, three armed rivals aiming to end him and his chapter's influence. It had been Jack, driving by on a quiet night patrol of his own, who stopped, leveled his calm presence into decisive action, and with Rex at his side forced the attackers to scatter. Cole never forgot the moment Rex leapt with terrifying precision at the man holding a knife to his ribs, nor the steady hand of Jack pulling him clear from danger. From that night on, though not wearing the Serpent's colors, Jack and his dog were treated as kin. This bond explained why the veteran and his canine companion were honored guests on the evening that should have belonged solely to Emily's laughter. Emily herself was turning 5, a tiny girl with chestnut hair tied in a short ribbon, wearing a simple white dress dotted with pink flowers. She stayed close to her father, often clutching his leather-gloved hand, sometimes peeking out shyly at the crowd with a smile that made even the roughest bikers soften. When someone bent down to greet her, she hid her face against her father's vest, then peeked out again with a nervous giggle, the innocence of her age shining through. Around them, the bikers presented a striking image, men with beards thick and tangled, arms covered in ink, leather vests with pins and patches, women in denim jackets and silver jewelry, all laughing, slapping backs, and raising glasses of beer. Yet behind the roughness, there was an undeniable warmth, the loyalty of a chosen family. Jack remained slightly apart, his olive jacket blending into the background, the black cap with the word veteran tilted low over his brow. His silver dog tag glinted under the lights, but his presence was quiet, content to watch Rex patrol around the edge of the party. Rex moved with the poise of a soldier, nose twitching as he sniffed the air, tail swaying in relaxed arcs but eyes sharp enough to catch what humans might ignore. Many of the bikers clapped Jack on the shoulder, calling him brother, and bent down to scratch Rex behind the ears, acknowledging both man and dog as part of their tribe. The music boomed louder, the laughter rose, and at last the centerpiece of the evening was wheeled out, a massive birthday cake, 3 tiers high, coated in white frosting and decorated with colorful sugar roses. Emily gasped and clapped her small hands, tugging at her father's arm with pure excitement. Her wide eyes sparkled with the joy only a 5-year-old could carry, and she pressed her face into her father's side, shy but delighted as the crowd cheered for her. Cameras flashed and rough voices softened into a chorus of celebration. But in the midst of this harmony, one sound shattered everything. Rex stiffened, his ears shot forward, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest before erupting into furious barking. The German shepherd lunged toward the cake table, claws scraping on the wooden floor, barking so violently that glasses rattled and children covered their ears. His body circled the cake in tight loops, nose pressed against the frosting, pulling back as if repelled by an unseen tisson. Jack strode forward, gripping the leash, but he did not scold. He knew Rex's instincts were rarely wrong. The room fell silent, the music cut, and every tattooed face turned toward the snarling dog as tension thickened in the air. Emily buried her face into her father's vest, trembling, her small hands gripping him tightly as she sensed the sudden shift in mood. Cole Walker barked in order, and two bikers pushed the crowd back. Among them, Dr. Mason Briggs, a 50-year-old biker with wire-rimmed glasses and a stethoscope slung habitually around his neck, stepped forward. Once an army medic, now the unofficial healer of the Serpents, his hands were steady even after years of patching wounds on the road. He crouched near the cake, pulled a small UV flashlight from his leather satchel, and swept its beam across the frosting. What had looked white under the party lights now revealed faint blue speckles, almost invisible until illuminated. Briggs leaned closer, sniffed, and frowned. A sharp chemical odor wafted up, stinging the nostrils, unnatural in the sweet air of sugar and cream. Jack's jaw clenched as Briggs scraped a thin layer with a sterile swab. He muttered for a second opinion, and another biker with a background in chemistry, Alan Specs Johnson, thin, bespectacled, sleeves rolled up, took the sample and confirmed the suspicion. This was not ordinary sugar dust. It was a compound known to cause disorientation, paranoia, and loss of control, the kind used in illicit experiments rather than kitchens. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and several bikers instinctively reached for their sidearms as if an invisible enemy had just entered the room. Emily's cake had been poisoned. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Mothers pulled their children closer, the bikers cursed under their breath, and Cole's face turned pale beneath the tan and beard. He lifted Emily into his arms, shielding her against his chest, while his other hand gripped the table's edge so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Jack steadied Rex, whose bark had eased into a low protective growl, the kind that warned of danger still present. The veteran's mind raced, cataloging details: the delivery man who had dropped the cake off that afternoon, the unlocked side door to the garage, the unfamiliar face among the crowd who had slipped out minutes earlier. Cole's voice thundered, demanding order, and the bikers obeyed, sealing the exits, scanning the shadows. No one dared to take a slice of cake now. The once joyful centerpiece stood like a silent accusation. Emily trembled in her father's arms, too young to understand, her small voice lost in whispers he could not answer, while Rex sat stiffly at Jack's side, his amber eyes locked on the cake as though daring it to reveal more secrets. The air buzzed with suspicion and fear, but above it all, gratitude flickered, because without Rex, the night would have ended in tragedy before the candles were even lit. The chaos did not completely erase the unity of the group. One by one, the bikers acknowledged Jack and Rex not just as guests, but as saviors of the evening. Glasses remained untouched, plates left full, but all eyes held the same truth. Someone had tried to harm the leader's child, and someone inside or near their world had delivered that weapon in frosting and sugar. The Iron Serpents were not a club known for forgiveness. Tonight, justice would demand to be answered. Emily had been whisked away to a back room under guard. Cole stood surrounded by his closest men, and Jack placed a steady hand on Rex's fur, grounding both himself and the animal that had once again proven to be more than a companion. The cake, untouched, sat under the cold beam of the UV light, glowing with the unnatural trace of poison. The celebration had ended, replaced by a heavy silence and the chilling knowledge that their enemy was bold, cunning, and willing to strike at innocence itself. The garage that had moments before echoed with laughter now stood under a heavy silence broken only by the shuffle of boots and the low murmur of voices. The Iron Serpents wasted no time in securing their stronghold. The wide wooden doors were dragged shut with a metallic screech, and two men stood guard at each entrance, their hands resting on the grips of their sidearms. Inside, Cole Walker sat with Emily clutched tightly in his arms, her small 5-year-old frame trembling as her ribbon slipped loose from her hair. Mothers gathered their children, pressing them close, while fathers cursed in low tones. The celebration was over, and the Serpents' clubhouse had become a fortress braced for war. The tension was unbearable. Men who had spent years fighting rival gangs and surviving roadside ambushes now paced like caged animals, veins bulging in their tattooed arms, itching for someone to blame. One biker slammed his fist into the wall. Another kicked over a chair, their rage spilling into action they could not yet direct. Cole barked orders, his voice hard, instructing them to hold positions and protect his family. His jaw was clenched, the fear of nearly losing his daughter mingling with the cold fury of a man whose enemies had dared strike at his blood. Emily buried her face into his vest, too young to understand the depth of the danger, but sensing enough to cling to her father as though he alone was the shield between her and the world. Amid the storm of anger, Rex stirred. The German shepherd had not stopped growling low in his chest, his amber eyes flicking toward the doors and corners as if the very air carried traces of something foul. Jack Carter, calm and composed as always, watched him closely. Then Rex pulled against the leash, nose to the ground, his body taut with purpose. Jack knew better than to restrain him when he was on a scent. He gave a quiet nod to Cole, who caught the signal immediately. Without a word, Jack let Rex lead him, the crowd parting as the dog guided them out into the night. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint tang of oil and gasoline from the rows of motorcycles parked like sentinels under the streetlights. The night sky was moonless, heavy with clouds, the kind of darkness that pressed in and blurred the edges of vision. Rex pulled Jack down the gravel path beside the garage, his nails clicking against the ground, his tail rigid, his nose darting from side to side. Jack followed with steady steps, his senses sharpened by years of training. He had learned to trust the dog more than any man's word. They moved into the alley behind the clubhouse, a narrow strip where shadows pooled thick and deep. Broken crates leaned against the wall, and trash cans stood like forgotten sentries. At first glance, there was nothing unusual, but Rex's growl rose again, his head snapping toward the far corner. There, half hidden in the dark, sat an old cargo truck. Its paint was chipped, the once blue surface mottled with rust, one tire sagging into the gravel. At first it looked abandoned, another relic of small-town decay, but Rex would not be fooled. He strained forward, teeth bared, the fur along his spine bristling. Jack approached carefully, his hand brushing the grip of the combat knife tucked at his belt. He circled the truck once, noting the locked doors and the faint smell of chemicals leaking through the cracks. He signaled to two bikers who had followed at a distance. Tommy Bear Henderson, a burly man in his 30s with a shaved head and thick leather vest, and Nate Slim Garza, a wiry Latino rider with sharp eyes and a nervous habit of chewing gum. Both men were loyal to Cole, and both respected Jack enough to follow without question. Together, they pried open the rear doors. The hinges screeched, the metallic echo bouncing down the alley. A beam of flashlight pierced the dark interior. What they saw was not the usual cargo of tools or spare parts. Stacked against the wall were several small containers, their labels scrawled with codes and hazard warnings. One had cracked slightly, and the pungent odor was unmistakable. It was the same acrid chemical scent that had risen from the poisoned cake. Bear swore under his breath, Slim's chewing gum fell from his mouth, and Rex barked once, sharp and urgent. Jack climbed inside, his boots crunching on the gritty floor. He knelt beside a small wooden crate and pulled it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, edges worn, faces of children staring back in faded colors. Some looked no older than Emily. Each had a number scrawled in black ink on the back. The sight made his chest tighten, a knot of anger and dread coiling in his gut. Beside the photos lay a crumpled sheet of paper filled with coded entries, strings of numbers and letters, meaningless at first glance but carrying the weight of something organized, systematic, and cruel. Rex sniffed around the boxes, whining softly now, his earlier fury shifting into something mournful, as if he sensed the gravity of what was found. Jack stood, holding one of the photos to the light. It was a girl, maybe 6 or 7, her hair tied in braids, eyes wide with innocence. He turned it over and stared at the number on the back. He could feel Bear's eyes on him, could hear Slim mutter a curse in Spanish. The evidence was scattered, incomplete, but it spoke volumes. This was not simply an attempt to poison a birthday party. This was a thread leading into a far darker tapestry. The men carried a few of the crates out into the open, laying them beneath the glow of the streetlight. More bikers had gathered, drawn by the sound of Rex's bark and the sight of Jack rummaging through the truck. Cole arrived last, Emily now held safely by her mother in the clubhouse. His eyes burned as he looked at the photographs spread across the gravel, his fists trembling at his sides. He bent down, picked one up, and stared at the face of a missing child. No words came, only the weight of understanding settling onto his shoulders like a curse. Jack spoke quietly, his voice steady but edged with steel. "This isn't just about your family. Whoever did this is part of something larger. His words were met with silence, every biker processing what lay before them. The Iron Serpents had faced rivals before, men with knives, guns, grudges. But this was different. This was organized, calculated, and aimed not just at a man's pride but at the innocence of children. The crates, the chemicals, the photographs, the coded sheet-all were fragments of a puzzle that hinted at something monstrous. The alley grew colder as the night deepened, the realization chilling every man present. Rex sat beside Jack, ears still pricked, watching the shadows as though expecting them to move. His amber eyes reflected the streetlight, sharp and unyielding. In his silence, he carried the truth of the moment. They were standing at the edge of something far larger than they had imagined. What began as a poisoned cake at a birthday party now pointed to a conspiracy too dark to ignore. The discovery in the alley weighed heavily on every man present. The old cargo truck, with its rusting shell and sagging tires, no longer looked abandoned but instead loomed as a vessel of hidden cruelty. The photographs of children, the faintly glowing chemicals, and the coded sheet of paper lay spread beneath the harsh glow of the streetlight. The air smelled of rust and chemicals, sharp and biting, while silence settled over the bikers like a shroud. Rex sat close to Jack, his ears pricked, his amber eyes fixed on the crates, as though he too understood the gravity of what had been unearthed. Cole Walker bent down, the leather of his vest creaking as he picked up one of the photographs. His thick fingers trembled despite his effort to control them. The picture was of a boy with freckles and sandy hair, no older than 7, his smile wide and innocent. Cole's face darkened as recognition struck. He had seen this child's missing poster pinned to the notice board outside the town's grocery store months earlier. A growl escaped his throat, not unlike Rex's, low and dangerous, the sound of a man confronting a truth he could not unsee. Jack took another photo, this one of a little girl with dark braids, her eyes wide with fear even in the still frame. He flipped it over and read the number scrawled on the back. The numbers weren't random, they were identifiers, cataloging children like cattle. His military-trained mind pieced together the fragments, the chemicals meant to control, the forged documents tucked between the crates, the photos with codes. It was no longer speculation, it was a system. This was not a random act of cruelty, but part of a network with reach, method, and purpose. Alan Specs Johnson knelt beside the papers, adjusting his glasses as his eyes darted across the coded sheet. He pushed his hair back with ink-stained fingers and muttered calculations under his breath. Specs had once studied chemistry and logistics before drifting into the biker life, and his sharp mind, though hidden under a rough exterior, had not dulled. "These aren't delivery notes," he said finally, his voice low but certain. "They're schedules, dates, locations, transfers. Whoever this belongs to, they're moving kids like shipments." His words hung in the air, and even the roughest bikers shifted uncomfortably. Cole stood tall, his eyes sweeping over his men. They had seen him rage in fights, roar in battles with rivals, and laugh at bonfires. But this was different. His face was grim, almost hollow, as though he bore the weight of each child's stolen smile. He looked to Jack, the man whose judgment he trusted, silently asking for clarity. Jack met his gaze, his voice steady. "This truck isn't the end. It's a link. Whoever did this is part of a chain that's bigger than this town. And they were bold enough to strike at your family to cover their tracks." The truth was bitter, and the Serpents knew it. Bear Henderson, the burly biker whose fists could crack a jaw in one punch, slammed his palm against the truck's side, the metallic clang echoing like a gunshot. "So what now?" he demanded, his beard bristling, his voice hot with fury. Slim Garza spat his gum into the dirt and shook his head, muttering that no child should ever be listed like a product on a sheet of paper. Even the men who often thrived on chaos now stood uneasy, their anger tempered by the sheer enormity of the crime before them. Cole raised his hand for silence. His voice was low, measured, every word dripping with resolve. "This isn't just my fight. This isn't just about Emily. It's about every kid on these papers. And if we let this slide, if we call it someone else's problem, then we're no better than the bastards who did it." He looked at his men one by one, seeing their eyes harden, seeing loyalty ignite into something sharper. The Iron Serpents had long been branded as outlaws, men who lived by their own code, but in that moment they became more than a club. they became protectors. Jack placed the photos back into the crate, his hands steady despite the weight of what he carried. He felt Rex lean against his leg, the dog's warmth a reminder that loyalty was not measured by words, but by action. Jack spoke softly but firmly. We follow the trail. We find out where this leads, and we don't stop until it's finished. His words, though quiet, struck harder than any roar. The bikers nodded, some muttering oaths under their breath, the kind of promises that bound men tighter than any written code. The night deepened, and the air grew colder. The crates and photographs were gathered carefully, the evidence too damning to leave behind. Specs tucked the coded sheet into his vest, his eyes already working to unravel its secrets. Bear and Slim secured the chemicals, grimacing at the acrid stench that burned their nostrils. Cole remained still, his broad figure silhouetted against the streetlight, his mind replaying the sight of his daughter's terrified eyes as Rex barked at the poisoned cake. This was no longer about vengeance. It was about duty to family, to brotherhood, to the children whose faces now stared at them from crumpled photos. When they finally dispersed, the bikers did not roar or boast as they usually did. They moved with the grim purpose of soldiers heading into battle, their engines growling low, their faces set like stone. Jack walked at the front, Rex close by, the leash slack but unnecessary, for the dog was bound not by rope but by unshakable loyalty. The iron serpents were no longer thinking about who had poisoned a birthday cake. They were thinking about a network that trafficked children like cargo, a network that had just crossed the wrong line. The night had grown darker, heavy clouds blotting out the stars and leaving the streets awash in a dim, uneasy glow from scattered streetlights. The iron serpents rode as one, their engines low and guttural, rolling thunder that carried through the deserted outskirts of town. Jack Carter sat tall at the front, Rex running in stride beside the lead bikes, his ears pinned back against the wind, his nose lifted to catch the trail that only he could sense. Every twist and turn of the ride was guided by the dog's sharp instincts, pulling them toward a destination that none of them could yet see, but all of them felt looming ahead. The convoy slowed as Rex stopped abruptly, growling at the darkness ahead. The bikers cut their engines, and silence fell like a curtain. Before them stood a warehouse, long abandoned in appearance, its corrugated steel walls rusted, windows broken and jagged, a relic of industry left to rot. But faint light flickered through the cracks, the telltale hum of generators breaking the night. It was the kind of place chosen for things unseen by the public eye, a waypoint where shadows passed before vanishing into deeper night. Cole Walker lifted his hand, signaling the riders to fan out. Their boots crunched gravel as they dismounted, spreading in a wide arc. The serpents surrounded the warehouse with the precision of men who had fought side by side for years, their engines still warm, their presence unmistakable. The low growl of Harley exhausts echoed as some revved deliberately, their sound announcing that predators had arrived. Jack's eyes swept the perimeter, calm but sharp, while Rex stood rigid beside him, his nose twitching, his hackles raised. Through the grimy window panes, Jack spotted movement. Two men, mid-30s, average build, faces hard and tired from years of crime. One wore a sweat-stained gray hoodie, his dark hair greasy and unkempt, eyes darting nervously as he checked a clipboard. The other was bald, heavily tattooed across his neck and arms, a cigarette clinging to his lips as he shoved boxes into position. Behind them, in the far corner of the warehouse, stood a metal cage. Small hands gripped the bars, eyes wide and frightened, the muffled sobs of children reaching the ears of those outside. The sight hit harder than any punch. Cole's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the handle of his knife. Bear Henderson muttered a curse, while Slim Garza spat in the dirt, his eyes narrowing to slits. Even the most hardened of the serpents shifted uneasily, their usual bravado silenced by the undeniable image of innocence locked in steel. Jack breathed out slowly, centering himself. He turned to Cole and gave a single nod. There would be no speeches tonight, no negotiations, only action. At Cole's signal, the Harleys roared to life in unison, their engines screaming into the night like a battle cry. The warehouse walls vibrated with the sound, the two traffickers inside stumbling back in alarm. One dropped his clipboard, the cigarette falling from his lips as he scrambled toward the door, while the other reached for a pistol tucked into his waistband. The serpents poured forward, black leather and steel flooding the entrance, the air electric with fury and justice. Jack moved like a soldier, his boots slamming against the concrete as he charged. The bald man with the pistol barely had time to aim before Jack's fist crashed into his jaw with bone-cracking force. The weapon clattered to the floor, the man collapsing under the weight of the strike. Jack followed through, pinning him down, his knee pressing hard as he drove the fight out of him. Rex, unleashed at the same moment, exploded across the floor like lightning. The dog leapt onto the second man, slamming him to the ground, his teeth sinking into the criminal's arm and forcing the scream out of him. The children inside the cage whimpered at the noise, some clutching each other tightly. But they watched with wide eyes as the bikers fought not for pride or turf, but for them. Bear Henderson yanked the pistol away, tossing it across the floor, while Slim rushed to the cage, crouching to reassure the children with a rare gentleness in his rough voice. Cole strode forward, his blade flashing once before slicing the lock clean off. The cage door creaked open, and one by one the frightened children spilled out, tears on their faces but relief in their eyes as they were lifted into safety. The bald trafficker thrashed under Jack, cursing and spitting, until Jack slammed his fist once more, silencing him. Rex released his hold only when commanded, stepping back, his muzzle wet but his eyes steady, standing guard as the man writhed on the floor, clutching his wounded arm. The serpents stood tall around their captives, their presence a wall of leather, steel, and silent wrath. For once, their outlaw image served a different kind of justice, the kind that stood unflinching between predators and the innocent. Cole pulled out his phone, his thumb steady despite the rage still burning in his chest. He dialed directly to Sheriff David Richardson, a man who had once been wary of the serpents, but who could not ignore what was now undeniable. Cole's voice was low and clipped as he reported what they had found: traffickers, evidence, children alive and safe. He made it clear that this was not a cover-up or a battle for territory. It was a rescue. By the time he hung up, sirens were already wailing faintly in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The bikers gathered the children near the doorway, wrapping them in spare jackets, offering water and gentle words. The roaring engines were silenced, the battle won, but the weight of what they had uncovered pressed down on every man present. Jack stood with Rex at his side, one hand resting on the dog's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat of his companion. He looked at the frightened but safe faces of the children, and knew, as did the serpents, that tonight had drawn a line. They had stepped beyond the boundaries of their club and into something larger. The warehouse stood quiet now, its shadows pierced by the flashing red and blue of approaching patrol cars. Two men lay bound on the floor, defeated, while the children clung to their rescuers with desperate gratitude. The serpents did not cheer or boast. They stood in silence, their leather vests dark against the glow, their eyes carrying both fury and resolve. What had begun with a poisoned cake had led them here, to the heart of darkness, and they had pulled light out of it, if only for a moment. The warehouse still smelled of rust, gasoline, and fear when the first patrol cars arrived, their sirens cutting through the night and their red and blue lights painting the corrugated walls in harsh colors. The iron serpents stood in a line, silent figures of leather and ink, while the two bound traffickers groaned on the floor and the rescued children clung to whoever would hold them. Jack Carter remained steady at the center, one hand resting on Rex's shoulders, the other watching every movement with the calm vigilance of a man who had seen chaos before. The bikers waited, not as outlaws tonight, but as guardians handing over proof of something far greater than themselves. Sheriff David Richardson stepped out of the first cruiser, a tall man in his 40s with dark skin, broad shoulders, and a presence that commanded authority. His navy suit was wrinkled from long hours, his red tie loosened at the collar, but his eyes were sharp, his gold watch glinting under the lights as he surveyed the scene. For years he had kept the serpents at arm's length, wary of their reputation, suspicious of their methods, but tonight his gaze softened, if only slightly. He saw not criminals, but men who had saved lives. His deputies moved past him, securing the traffickers, collecting the crates of chemicals, and carefully logging the photographs and coded documents as evidence. Inside the warehouse, the children were wrapped in blankets pulled hastily from police vehicles, their frightened sobs easing as they were spoken to gently by officers and bikers alike. One young boy with a bruised cheek pressed his face into Bear Henderson's massive leather-clad chest, while Slim Garza crouched low to tie a little girl's shoelace with surprising patience. The roughest men in the county revealed unexpected tenderness, their large tattooed hands offering comfort rather than intimidation. Rex lay down among the children, his body a warm shield, letting them pet his fur as if he knew their trembling hands needed reassurance more than anything else. Cole Walker stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable as he watched the sheriff speak with his men. He had been a leader long enough to know what came next: questions, reports, investigations. Yet beneath the hardened exterior, he felt the weight of relief, heavier than any chain. Emily was safe, and because of Jack and Rex, she would live to see another sunrise. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling the moment her small hands clutched at his vest when Rex barked at the poisoned cake, and a shiver ran through him at what might have been. When he opened his eyes, his gaze found Jack, and in that look was gratitude too deep for words. Moments later, headlights cut through the night as another vehicle arrived. From the open door spilled Emily herself, carried gently by her mother. The girl's hair was tousled from sleep, the ribbon gone, but her eyes widened as she spotted Rex. With a cry that pierced every hardened heart present, she ran forward, stumbling slightly in her tiny shoes, and threw her arms around the German shepherd's neck. Rex wagged his tail and pressed his muzzle against her cheek, enduring the fierce embrace with patient loyalty. Emily clung to him as if he were the only safe place in a world too big and too cruel. The sight stilled the murmurs of the men around her. Cole's eyes glistened, though he would never allow tears to fall in public. He knelt beside his daughter, placing a hand gently on her back, and for the first time in years, his voice trembled as he whispered his thanks. Not only to his child, but to the dog and the man who had saved her. Around them, the serpents shifted, some bowing their heads, some crossing their arms, but all understanding that this moment had redefined them. They were no longer only outlaws in the eyes of the town. Tonight, they had stood for something greater. Sheriff Richardson approached Jack, his steps measured, his hand extended. For a long second, the weight of years of suspicion hung between them. Then Jack accepted the handshake, his grip firm, his eyes steady. The sheriff's voice was quiet but carried authority as he said, "We'll take it from here, but this wouldn't have been uncovered without you." Behind him, his deputies loaded the evidence into patrol cars, careful not to disturb the children who were being transported separately to safety. For the first time, law and outlaw stood on the same side of the line, united by the shared truth that innocence had to be protected. The children were escorted out, bundled against the night, their eyes wide but calmer now, their futures no longer chained in steel. The two captured traffickers were shoved roughly into the back of patrol cars, curses cut short by slammed doors. The evidence collected would not only condemn them, but lead the authorities toward dismantling the network that had cast such a shadow across the region. The Iron Serpents watched it all in silence, their expressions grim but resolved, understanding that they had struck a blow far larger than themselves. When the flashing lights receded into the distance, the warehouse fell into quiet once more. Cole gathered his men, his voice low and steady. "Tonight, we didn't just protect our own. Tonight we stood for every kid who couldn't fight back." His words echoed in the night, simple and true, and the men around him nodded in solemn agreement. They had been feared, distrusted, dismissed as criminals, yet tonight they had proven otherwise. They had proven that loyalty and conscience could reshape even the roughest hands into tools of justice. Jack stood apart, Rex leaning against his leg, both man and dog framed by the dim glow of the last patrol car as it pulled away. He looked back at the Serpents, at Cole and Emily, at the men who had fought beside him, and felt a rare sense of peace. He knew the fight was not over. There were always battles waiting, but for tonight, good had prevailed. Rex lifted his head, eyes gleaming in the dark, and Jack rested his hand on his companion's back. The bond between them, and the trust of those who had once been outsiders, was proof enough that heroes could rise from anywhere. At the end of this story, we are reminded that true heroism is often quiet, born not from glory but from compassion and sacrifice. A loyal dog, a veteran carrying his scars, and even bikers once judged harshly by society showed us that when love for others comes first, courage follows naturally. It is a lesson that kindness and silent sacrifice can change not only one life, but the fate of many. Take a moment to share this story with someone who needs hope. Write in the comments what this journey made you feel, and remember to subscribe for more stories that honor the strength of the human heart. May God bless you and your family, wherever you are watching from.